but kind of person who likes to watch wrestling and boxing, violent sports. So that person has a kind of craving, for that excitement of violent activity, and that will bring the contact with boxing matches, wrestling matches, violent sports, and then that will bring kind of feelings of excitement, joy when his favorite fighter is beating the other fighter, and so that will bring pleasant feelings, and disappointment, grief, sorrow if his chosen favorite fighter is losing, or if I like, particular type of music, then I will go to the concert to hear that music. And so I seek out this contact when I hear the music, and it will give rise to pleasant feeling. So these are feelings, or if I hear certain news that somebody that I like has met with some misfortune, then I will feel sorrow over that. Or if somebody that I like has met with some good luck, some success, then I'll feel joy and happiness because of that. Then these are the feelings that are arising through my present volitional activity. These are not coming about through the results of the past. But a lot of the feelings that we undergo come about sort of passively because we're making encounters with things that we don't have, with situations over which we have no control, and then these are bringing up certain feelings in us. So a certain number of feelings are the direct effects of past karma, but not all feelings. Okay, so anyway, for convenience sake, the factors from consciousness through feeling are considered the present effects of the past causes. So those are the 5 present effects. Then we have the present causes, craving, clinging, and karmic existence. But whenever there's craving and clinging, along with them there's ignorance. So we have ignorance in the present too, implicit in craving and clinging. And when we mention karmic existence, that is virtually synonymous with volitional activities. And so we have 5 present causes: the craving, the clinging, the ignorance, and the karmic existence and volitional activities. And these present causes bring as their future effects birth and old age and death. But birth, old age, within birth, old age, and death, we get consciousness, name and form, 6 sense spaces, contact, and feeling. And so we actually have 5 future effects. And so in this way we have 5 causes in the past which bring about 5 present effects, and 5 causes in the present which bring about 5 future effects. In fact, in the future effects, you could have put in birth, aging, and death, then you could have had 7 future effects. But I think the authors of this treatise, they wanted to make it very neat, just keeping everything reduced to 5s. And so they kept birth, aging, and death out, and just kept consciousness through feeling as the future effects. Okay, so this takes care of the entire table on dependent origination, and it shows again how everything, all of these factors are intricately interdependent, interwoven, so that it's only through an abstraction that we can draw out certain factors and say these belong to the past, these to the present, these to the future. Okay, Any questions now about the 20 modes and the 4 groups?
Andy, I have a question. For the case of Arahant, I'm pretty sure it's number 1, 2, 8, 9 is eradicated. But what about number 10?
Okay, for the Arahant, number 1, 2, 8, 9 are eradicated, and number 10 you're asking?
Yeah.
Does that remain for the Arahant?
That's remain, and then for one more life?
No, because the Arahant doesn't have a future life.
No, I mean this present life.
Of course he has present activities, but those activities are not constructing another existence. And so they wouldn't be considered number 10. Number 10 are karmic activities, or activities considered only insofar as they are creating the karma which will bring about a new existence. In fact, the Arhat doesn't even create karma that will bring its result in this existence. His actions are considered just bare activities, but not karmically creative activities. Please.
That's because there's no, I'm always mispronouncing this, upana.
Yeah,
is not,
yeah.
doesn't grasp onto,
Yeah.
so there's no bhavata. There's nothing to
There's no ignorance, no craving, no clinging.
come into existence.
Yeah. Well, this is another. Okay. Can we describe consciousness as a grasping, clinging life force or life energy? And Gandhava is just a special term for consciousness. At first, I don't think it's correct to describe consciousness as necessarily a grasping or clinging force, because grasping or clinging can be eliminated, but consciousness will remain. This is in the case of the Arhat, who has consciousness, but no grasping or clinging. Then the Gandhava we will come to later. It's in the same sutta, but I won't take it today. Next week we'll take the Gandhava. Any further questions here?
I fear to ask.
No, you never should be afraid.
I fear to ask. Where
I
does...
only bite.
I know.
Three times.
I'm not that smart. So
I only have a tiger in a cage. A hungry tiger.
And he's waiting for me, I think. Perhaps I'm right.
But go ahead, don't be afraid.
Well,
We'll order some steaks for him.
does the concept of heaven and hell occur here somewhere?
In the Buddhist text? Or
Well, around all of this, there's no mention of that
in this
concept.
formula it's not mentioned, but they're mentioned in other texts. Yeah.
Does it have impact on this or no?
Well, those would be some of the realms in which birth can take place.
But we're not going to consider those realms now with this.
I don't want to go into the different realms
Okay.
now. Yeah.
Okay.
I think these links make sense to me, except the one that I'm struggling with is the one from ignorance to volitional activities.
Yeah.
And the reason is because, okay, under volitional activities, it could be wholesome or unwholesome.
Yeah.
So I can see how unwholesome would cause the rest of the things to come into being. But wholesome, I guess as long as, like you said before, there's a desire, a craving, and clinging, it's going to bring about the rest of the factors. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of maybe an interesting case. Okay, let us take somebody who is, maybe we call like an atheist, in the sense of not believing in any kind of future life. But this person, it's also a good person, so it's a generous person who gives to support humanitarian projects, very kind, generous, helpful to others. Okay, but this person still has like an underlying ignorance and craving. It doesn't mean that it's always like a bad kind of craving, like a craving for wealth or power or position, but just that there's still those factors underlying the mind. And so these good, wholesome activities still have the capacity to produce a rebirth, even though he doesn't believe in the rebirth. But from our understanding, they create that karmic force, and that karmic force will lead to a rebirth, maybe in a heavenly world or a happy human state of existence.
Is it heavenly?
Well, I wasn't going to discuss them at length, I'm just using this as an example. Yeah, so it's the underlying ignorance in the sense, not the gross ignorance, like we say, he's a bigoted, ignorant, deluded person. But this is just the kind of not having that penetrating insight into the real nature of the real laws of the universe.
So it's more like our latent tendencies?
Yeah, that's a good expression. The latent tendencies or underlying tendencies. And so when the activity is there, creating the karma, then it will bring the consciousness to a different realm. Yeah. What is your name? I just forgot your name. Did you have a question?
I have a quick question. I'm interested in the word sati, because it was used here, it seemed, in connection with existence. And not knowing any Pali, I heard it to refer to mindfulness or awareness.
No, this is a completely different word. When I had the formula on the board before, that was not, it's not the word sati meaning mindfulness. This was the present participle form of the verb ati, to be.
I have one question. I also wonder where does consciousness store in our body, or where is it?
You asked that question last time too.
She was not here.
No. Last class, last book we were studying, she asked the same question.
Oh.
I did? Yeah.
I didn't remember that.
The early suttas, they don't speak about a place, a physical place where consciousness is stored or where consciousness is based on. And even the early Abhidhamma texts just speak about that physical form on the basis of which consciousness arises, but it doesn't specify what that physical form is. But the general Buddhist tradition locates the base, the physical base for consciousness, is what they call the heart base, which is not the actual physical heart itself, but it's supposed to be some kind of like a subtle kind of form around the area of the heart. And that is considered the base of consciousness.
The heart chakra?
It would probably correspond to the heart chakra. So not the brain. In fact, I agree with this tradition from my own sort of investigations. And the way I sort of understand it, I use a comparison with the computer. I mean, this is a little bit off the topic of the sutta, but with the computer, the central processing unit is like the brain. So all of the programs that utilize draw upon the computer, all the programs, and all of the processing of information takes place in the central processing unit. But the power that drives the computer isn't coming from the central processing unit, but it depends upon another source, which will be the source of the electricity, either from the power grid, if it's plugged into the wall, or from the battery, if it's running on battery. But once that power of the electricity comes in, then the central processing unit can use that power in order to process information and work and run programs and read files and so on, and write to files. So similarly, the way I understand it, the sort of source of consciousness is actually the heart base, but once that consciousness is flowing in through from the heart base, then the brain is what uses that consciousness for whether thinking activity, any type of mental activity. But that's my personal opinion. Don't think that this is Orthodox Buddhism anyway. Somebody's going to write a book, The Buddha compared consciousness to the central processing unit.
So our practice is not only to get at the gap between feeling and craving. It's really to get at the 5 past or 5 present causes.
Yeah, it's actually the 5 causes in the present. And I wanted to sort of finish this by taking the cessation side of the 12 factors. So your question just leads into the side that I was going to deal with. Of course, then as the sutta goes on, we have I'm still on page 356, that we have the exposition of cessation. With the remainderless fading away, cessation of ignorance comes cessation of formations or volitional activities. With the cessation of volitional activities, cessation of consciousness, and so on, down to with the cessation of existence, cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, limitation, pain, grief, and despair cease. So that such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. So again, here we have the process of cessation laid out in terms of this 12-fold series. But when we look at this in practical terms, we have to ask, where does the process of cessation actually take place? And if we take the fundamental process of the causes, the causation, going from using the 20 modes of the 4 groups, then of course we can't actually deal with past causes because they took place in the past and the present effects are present with us now. But what we have to deal with are what are called the 5 present causes. And the most fundamental of the causes is ignorance, avijja or avidya. And so what is needed to counteract ignorance is vijja, that's wisdom or knowledge, or panya, jnana, panya, vijja, knowledge, wisdom, understanding, insight, and so on. And so at the most basic level, the whole series of causation comes to an end with the arising of ignorance, or with the arising of wisdom or insight. But sort of as the temporary measure to prevent the round from getting fueled again, what one has to do is to, in the practical day-to-day life, to create kind of space for wisdom to arise, for insight to arise, is to weaken the connection between the feelings and craving. So if we surrender to the craving, then we become engaged in a new round of activities, which will create new seeds of karma. But when we exercise that, this is restraint of the senses. So instead of letting the senses dominate us, then we can restrain the mental activity that arises in response to sensory input. And on the basis of that gap created between sensory input and the arising of craving, we can develop mindfulness and clear comprehension of experience. And then through the development of mindfulness and clear comprehension, there will come panya, wisdom, until that wisdom blossoms into full knowledge, deep understanding, penetrative realization. And then with that, the round comes to an end. Then what is actually eliminated in the present is ignorance, craving, clinging, and when that's fully eliminated, then there's no more volitional activity. There's actually volitional activity, but it doesn't create karma anymore. And so then there comes the end of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Okay, and that's the cessation side.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing because we're given these senses, right? So we have these senses, and so you mentioned restraining with some of the senses because we don't want to like craving, even just drinking or being with a girlfriend. But then when I walk around the woods, you know, and the trees and the beauty, and I love to hike and I love lakes and streams. You know, it's a very funny fine line.
Yeah, this is, I think, what has to be understand how this actually works in practice. And also, you have to remember that the Buddhist training is a gradual training. So he doesn't say that everybody has to give up their girlfriends, husbands have to give up their wives, wives give up their husbands. But
that stuff I understand, but you know, to some degree, you don't want to cling on to these things, you know, grasping, but it's like an oxymoron. It's a conflict because we have these wonderful senses of us that we can feel a flower and we can smell a flower, and there's some craving there, just almost inherent in the nature of ourselves. So we don't. Because I've given up drinking, I've given up eating meat, you know, all this stuff. But then I walk around and I get this almost euphoria from being in nature.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay, so
yeah, I mean, I live right across from this 7 Jewels Lake, so I see it every day.
Right, so there you go, and you're in a better state than I am, hopefully towards enlightenment. But the senses, the restraint from senses, we can't restrain from them. Or
I would make a distinction here between what I would call the wholesome use of the senses, so that I would say that exposure to nature can be mentally uplifting and inspiring and even purifying. And so, like in the autumn or spring, if I walk around this lake, when I come back, I feel the mind is very much settled, calm, tranquil, uplifted with a kind of joy and delight.
And this is true, but yet it leads to a certain type of clinging. Another example is I spent some time with my daughter this summer, and then she moved out to California. I went out with her, and it's pure love. But afterwards, after you're exposed to something, whether it's nature, whether it's my daughter's love, there's a missing, there's a clinging, there's a craving, there's an emptiness. And it's just a funny thing. It's just almost a philosophical conversation of the inherent nature of ourselves, and that we're instinctually, I feel an attachment to my daughter. And so these things, it's just a very interesting thing. I think about this as you're talking about this whole time. These pure things of love or nature that, and I agree with you. There's a certain, but that fine line of the euphoria that we get because I was with my daughter and now I cling and I miss her.
Yeah, I think that's quite human and quite natural, and I don't think one should fight against those feelings of love. One should try, of course, to reduce the attachment somewhat by considering, there are different ways to go about this. One is to consider that in the course of this beginningless round of birth and death, it's hard to find a single person who has not been at some past time our own son, our own daughter, our own mother, father. And so by reflecting in this way, one could extend that feeling of love, ideally, I say, to all sentient beings, or at least to all human beings. But again, one shouldn't blame oneself if one feels a certain preference for a select number of human beings rather than others, since it's just natural to feel in that way. Maybe there's somebody with children who would have any comment on this? Okay, Tracy does.
One thing I found having a child is that it can be a way to work with impermanence. That my daughter, who I love very much, is preparing to go away to England to go to school.
So even as I naturally, I love her and I like to be with her, I have to reflect on the impermanence of life. So in a way, it can be a way to work in life, in a practical way.
No, I mean, I understand all these things, and I have studied Buddhism, and I understand, the impermanence, and I meditate on these things. I almost find that my point is that the human condition and our feelings is almost an obstacle to enlightenment of sorts. It's just a very interesting conundrum as we are as humans. We're very human and based, and that's why our practice is so hard to get beyond that.
Yeah.
I don't.
Andrea, you want to say?
I'll wait for the microphone.
Thank you.
Just for you.
It's for the recording, you don't know why.
What you had mentioned earlier when you were talking about how to practice restraint, that was the first part of your question, yes?
Yeah, that was what Bhante said, restraint from the senses. He mentioned that word.
Right. Well, in everyday walking life, that's kind of hard to do. But when they speak about, I'm trying to put this in an articulate manner. When the Buddha talks about sitting ardent, resolute, restrained from sensual pleasures in the meditation, because in the meditation, you can do that, at least for that temporary period of time. Temporary, okay? While you're doing that, you are secluded, you are restrained, you are renunciating in that space of time. You might go out and drink a bunch of liquor afterwards, but in that space of time, that's where you can really start to look at that. And that temporary moral state, calm state, restrained state is what helps you, brings you to the mindfulness or the samadhi. Even though, and it's true, and then hopefully you can look at how these things connect, and look at the feelings, and look at how things grasp. But then it's quite another thing. I know to do that.
Maybe if just one other person has a comment, then we'll take one more comment, and then we'll have to stop for the moment.
I have an observation about the cessation phase of the 12 factors. It looks like it leads us back to the Noble Eightfold Path.
Yeah, well, of course, the Noble Eightfold Path is the way to bring about the arising of this wisdom, of the insight.
Because, as you mentioned, the most fundamental is ignorance. The way to counteract is wisdom, insight, which really brought about by meditation, concentration, and then the basis for that is, kind of
Okay, we'll have to stop now for the morning.
May I just say something very quickly?
Yeah, okay.
But I need a translator. I want to say it in Chinese because I don't know how to express in English.
You wrote me very good,
Anyway, I just say it in Chinese and say somebody can help to translate.
You wrote me good.
就那个先生刚刚说的，比如喜欢自然的那种哈，
我是觉得那些，它也就是一种nature，那种东西。然后就是说，我们不去执着于那个东西。我们当时可能是enjoy，but after that， 我们可以放下，就是说不去老是想着我今天必须要去那个地方，我心里面才会舒服啊那样，就是说不去执着。就我之前有听故事，就是说阿罗汉，我忘记是哪个阿罗汉，就是佛的大弟子之一。我听到那个歌声的时候还会起舞，就是他有一种习性在，但是他不会说去执着那个东西怎么样。好，谢谢。
Oh, she's just saying that enjoy nature and don't attach to it. She also enjoys nature, but after you have enjoyment, after that moment of enjoyment, you just don't attach to it, don't keep thinking back and then say that I want to get back there. And she said she gave an example of an arahant.
Music. Music can dance with
I don't think it's an arahant, but it's a, yeah. Well, I'll just translate what she said. An arahant who, after hearing music, pleasant music, will start dancing. But that arahant didn't have attachment to it. So that's the example she gave.
I don't know any examples in the Pali text.
It's actually from the Mahayana.
I know that it's from the Yeah, I know. But what one does find in the Therigatha is that some of the arahants who lived in the woods, they would write poems extolling the beauties of the mountains, the clouds over the mountains, the birds and monkeys playing in the forest. So, don't be worried about enjoying nature. Okay, so we end for this morning. And today I have to give a class in the afternoon for the retreat, so I won't have the discussion group. I want to take a little rest after the lunch. But any further questions, we'll finish the sutta next week. We'll have the class next week back in the Taishu, Kuan Yin Hall. I think back in the Kuan Yin Hall. There's nothing going on next week, is there?
Kuan Yin Hall?
Yeah. Okay, so we're back in Kuan Yin Hall next week. And then any questions that you have on anything discussed today, we can discuss next week. Okay, so I'll end with the sharing of the merits. We have the, okay, for some, okay, so we share the merits with the devas, the deities, the nagas, the Buddhas, and all beings, wishing them to be well and happy, and to protect the Buddha's teaching, to protect ourselves and others. Akasata Jagumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyam Tang Manumodipa Shiram Rakantu Sasanam Akasata Jagumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyam Tang Manumodipa Shiram Rakantu Desanam Akasata Jagumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantam Anumodipa Shiram Rakantu Mamparam Etavata Mehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavata Mehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Bhutanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavata Mehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Satanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavagupadaya vichitato etantare satakayupapanna rupeya rupicha asanya samino dukha pamochantu pasantu vibhuti